But we got this right here, Matt. You want to set this up for me?
This is from at a more perfect union, US. It's a good, I think, it's a 4-minute clip. Just put a little bit of it for you here. It kind of, I mean, Jeff Bezos can't figure out what more to do with his money than space travel. I would suggest maybe allowing more bathroom breaks for some of your workers as a very, very, very bare minimum. So here's some of these workers.
If I had the opportunity to talk to Jeff Bezos face to face, I would really want to ask him, have he ever worked in a warehouse before? Have he sweated for 10 to 12 hours a day and not being able to go to the restroom when he needed to go?
And the issue of working conditions, I'm very proud of our working conditions.
They got cameras, they watching us all the time.
It's a lot of walking, it's a lot of fast pace, it's a lot of climbing upstairs. It's just a lot for the human body.
It's tiring, it's consistent, it's fast speed, it's unsafe because you consistently working fast pace 10 hours, only 2 breaks.
They're getting treated like robots, and it's not fair because even robots break down sometimes. I have issues when ladies are talking about TOT time, time off task, when they have to go use the restroom, when they saying that the restroom could be on the other side of the building, that they have to take their walk so far and they're timing them. And when they run out of time, people are calling me emotional like, Michael, I'm on last chance. They said it's extremely hot in there. They said they have had people to pass out because of the extreme hotness in there.
Who get doctored or get TOT time for going to the bathroom? Who get...
I mean, what more do you need to really see?
No, I mean, and next time you hear some doofus going on about how Jeff Bezos represents some kind of, futuristic, visionary leadership, show him that. Because that is the real legacy of Amazon and of Jeff Bezos. It has not been innovation. It has been about finding new ways to squeeze people to the breaking point.
Absolutely.
And the fact is that people are starting to stand up and fight back and get organized and recognizing that the power that we have is immense, but we have to start standing together. And I'm really excited to be talking next week with the Valley Labor Report about that, the fight in Alabama and across the across the state across the state of Alabama, across the South, because this is what we're seeing right now is the new phase of capitalism. In a lot of ways can seem very different than the way that we imagine, the kind of more traditional idea of like exploitation under capitalism. But fundamentally it's just the same old stuff, which is just using people as machines and pushing them to their breaking point.
Yeah, and just to widen the scope a little bit internationally, like the more things change, the more they stay the same. As I was reading a little bit about Haiti in the good neighbor policy era, where there's literally a clause where they had to pass any legislation with the U.S. ambassador, right? And fast forward to the Obama administration when they want to pass a minimum wage increase, and Haynes and Levi come through and say, no, we're going to need to carve out for that because we are making a lot of money off of 23 cents an hour wages for these people.
No, and honestly, man, I think that's a good, because look, we all know, and we've talked about this all on this show, the connections, for example, with the Obama administration and Amazon, right? A lot of these people who worked in the Obama administration, most notably Jay Carney, right, have gone on to have very, very profitable roles in the Amazon corporation. In fact, their main job being demonizing workers who were fighting back against unfair conditions during COVID, right? And I wanted to bring that up to make this point about this kind of weird regional obsession that a lot of liberals have about when they're trying to talk about the rest of the country, right? And this is like the left secession stuff. There was another piece that came out in The Nation, it broke yesterday, called this case for blue state secession. And it was written by Nathan Newman, who I believe teaches at CUNY in New York City. And it's the pretty classic argument, right? That the blue states in this country provide the most economic, the largest contribution to the United States economy. And also there's undertones about culture and society and all that other kind of stuff too, right? And the blue states are constantly held down by the red states, which is, first of all, it's a joke to say that when you remember that these major cities in this country, right, the big financial hubs, particularly New York City, how do they exist? How do they make money? They make money because wealthy corporations from all around the United States and all around the globe bring that money into something called Wall Street, right? Which is a major financial hub, which then means that people are using their extra, these people, the 1%, the people at the height of this society are then using their extra money to buy real estate and to invest in this area, right? So like the wealth that cities like New York and Chicago, right, and LA have fundamentally are because they are hubs for the global elite, and in particular the American elite, right? And this isn't even a dig against like the everyday person in Chicago or New York or Los Angeles. It's just helping people understand, why are these cities so wealthy? Well, it's because they act like magnets for finance, right? So acting like there's some kind of, that these cultures are better, right? Or these societies are stronger is just absurd on its face, especially when you remember that, if you're trying to be a good capitalist, you have to know one thing, right? If you want to make a profit, you need money to invest. And where does most of that investment come from at first? It comes from extractive industries, right? And if you're talking about extractive industries in the United States, right, those are the natural resources that are abundant all across this country. But there are also things like coal, right, which have decimated not just the landscape of large parts of this country, but generations of workers. Things like oil, again, which is something that people have a hard time talking about the real history of it, but it's a very similar story there. Destroyed land and destroyed, generations of workers to benefit and to profit a very small few and elite. So in this piece, basically, not to go on too much of a tirade before I explain what he's saying, he is arguing, just like the very first episode of Left Reckoning, honestly, where was it? Siskind? I can't remember her first name.
Amy
Another
Siskind.
one of these, Amy Siskind, another one of these New York, like Wall Street feminists, was arguing, that what needs to happen is that the blue states need to secede from the Union so that they can be free of the yoke of the rest of the country, right? And let's just start with the first and most apparent and disgusting aspect of this argument is that if you are talking about these super wealthy zip codes across the country leaving the United States, what you basically are saying is that you want to excise poor people from your country, because that is who lives in these states. Not to mention, too, we are talking about the most diverse states in the country. Yes, believe it or not, y'all, the South is the most diverse part of the country. So all these liberals who love to talk about how they want to stand up for people of color, they are very prepared, for whatever reason, and we'll get into some of the ideology why we think that this exists later, for whatever reason, to excise all those people, say that they don't want to deal with this problem. Honestly, it's the same kind of mentality that you got from the 90s liberals, right? When they cut welfare as we know it, right? They're kind of solution to the problems that we have in the society. And there are problems we have to deal, we have to deal with them. But instead of trying to deal with those politically or democratically, it's literally just like, okay, let's try to throw as many poor people under the bus as possible.
Yeah, I mean, and it is such a weird it's not weird. It's it obfuscates basic.
It's an elitist
realities.
Mentality, man.
Right.
That's what it is.
Right. What do you think, like, these are port towns, you idiot. Where do you think they're getting the stuff to export? Right? Like, I don't know. And then, now obviously it's financial, but like even Chicago, that example, like literally Chicago is Chicago because it was a gateway to the plains, to settling the plains for this country.
Chicago hosts financial markets too.
Yeah,
right. I mean, it's not something that's absent from there either. But here's the really big point, especially when it comes to New York, right? Is they love to cite this idea of givers and takers, right? Which should alert you about something when somebody makes that kind of argument, that maybe they're not actually coming from it from the most progressive or left-wing perspective, or when they start to basically insinuate that large parts of the country are like welfare queens, right? Yeah. Is they use this argument that like, oh, well, you know, when it comes to tax dollars, right? You know, these states like New York and Connecticut pay more than the red states, right? They always leave out Nebraska, right? Which has Warren Buffett in Nebraska, which is another state that actually gives more than it gets back from the federal government. I wonder why. Well, it's because they have one of the wealthiest people in the country who lives there. And that's the same reason that New York and Connecticut and all these other blue states provide so much. You know, they can make the argument that they provide more in their taxes than the state receives back from the federal government. Well, it's because this is where the rich people in this country live. Like, you know, because like if you take that argument to like its logical conclusion, would a fairer tax, you know, situation be that we're not going to come after the extreme billionaire wealth? I mean, what happens to the things that liberals get pink in the cheeks about, right? That they are going to make the wealthy pay their fair share. Somehow it's a problem when making the wealthy pay their fair share is going to working class people in Alabama or in Tennessee, right? You know, it's like, it's a mean argument. It's just one that I just want people to understand its roots are one, they're very confused, right, to make a progressive argument for it. And fundamentally, they are anti-working people and anti-people of color, right? And it's a disgusting kind of escapist fantasy that eradicates and avoids the entirety of American history. You know, why does New York have, you know, all of this money? Well, like even the Southern oligarchs, right? Think about somebody like Anderson Cooper, right? Who comes from the Vanderbilt line. Right? Why is he born in New York City? Well, because if you are a rich person, even if you're a Southerner, you take your money here, right? And that's the point that we're trying to make, is not to say even that like, oh, these places are worse than any other place. It's just understanding the economic reality that rich people have taken their money and they've put it in certain localities, right? And then for people today into 2021 to say like, oh, well, actually, it's now time to like, you know, to punish the rest of the country for not being a finance hub. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, there's no reason to turn a call for like basic democratization of the elections, like getting rid of the electoral college, into base tribalism.
Yeah,
based on what state you're living in.
Because and like this is like the bigger point. Because I think there's 2 points that I want to make, right? There's one, the general point why this is like so popular amongst liberals, right? And it's because like liberalism in comparison to like socialism, democratic socialism right now has a very positive agenda. And I mean that not just in the sense that like this, like it has like good vibes. I mean that in the sense that like it has things that we want to do. Like we want Medicare for all. We want a higher minimum wage, right? We want to liquidate the billionaires. We want to have higher unionization rates across the country, right? And we want to end just constant war on people, and we want to end systems of like neoliberal policing, which hurt the working poor across and just like even and the unemployed, obviously, too, and the homeless across the country, right? Like democratic socialism has like a kind of positivity to it. American liberalism as it exists today does not have an agenda, and you can see that very clearly in Congress right now, where they have the mandate, they have the ability to do a lot of things, and they're sitting on their hands. What have we got a lot of? Symbolic politics, because a lot of liberalism right now is all image politics. And if you're doing image politics, you really need to define yourself against the negative, right? And so for a lot of American liberals today, for them to exist, they have to define themselves in opposition, not to anything substantial or anything even particularly political, right? Because at the end of the day, they aren't offering something that's radically different than the kind of austerity, they're the austerity light party to the GOP, right? So they're not offering some kind of radical policy differentiation between the two of them. What they are saying is like, to the redneck, I'm like the New York Times reader, right? To the unwashed masses, I am somebody who consumes culture and understands my place in the world, right? They want to be able to point to problems without ever addressing them.
Yeah, should we go to this clip of the 59 seconds of truth bombs on the requirements of elected leaders in America? So this is posted by Rex Chapman, who is just a guy who's posts a lot of stuff, not always reliable information from my perspective, and sometimes, takes attributions of things that maybe other people should get the credit for, but nonetheless. He posted this really awful thing positively, and as if this is a really good way to behave from this lady here. And I want to share it with everybody because let me just say quickly that, and bring it back to us first, that I am not a fan of Lauren Boebert. People can check out the show last week for a long segment that we did on Lauren Boebert. I've done the work, anti-Lauren Boebert work. This lady makes me take Lauren Boebert's side in like under 59 seconds, to be entirely frank. So here.
Are there really no job requirements for Congress? No background checks, no HR, no rules you have to follow? We have an age requirement, but no work requirement, no education requirement? No one checks your references or criminal background? You lose the right to vote if you're a felon, but not the right to be a lawmaker? Does that feel right? You know what I love? The GED. It's a fabulous program. You know what I don't like? The fact that Lauren Boebert got her GED while running for Congress. That means there wasn't anything holding her back from running without a high school diploma. So professors go to college, then graduate school, and then if they want to make tenure and make any real money, they have to get a PhD. But you could actually make more money and have more power being a high school dropout congressperson? That feels wrong. Maybe we should reevaluate telling our kids that dropping out of high school will set back their life. They can be a liar, or a criminal, a danger to their coworkers, or just straight up like, show me a job where I can publicly threaten my boss with execution and no one fires me. Is there any scenario in which you are explicitly told not to bring a gun to work and you just go like, fuck it, and you aren't fired on the spot? We clearly need stricter standards for our government. Are there really no job requirements?
Yeah, I mean, just absolutely disgusting. And I think everybody listening to that should have that reaction. Well, that kind of perspective is just despicable.
It's it's the management impulse, right? Like I was told by AppleCare, like somebody should fire them. These are elected representatives. There's no boss for these people besides the ballot box.
The people, and this is the fundamental point, right? As Thomas Frank hits constantly in his work, and in his most recent work on populism, the people know. He covers just how much American liberalism as it exists today has developed as an ideology that is opposed to democracy. They do not like the people. That is why technocracy is the standard that they want to hold our government to, instead of something like democratic rule. It gets to the fundamental politics of the Democratic Party today, which is something we talk about all the time. It is about managing the electorate, not expanding it. Right? Because if your problem, like Newman's problem in this piece where he's saying that the blue states should secede from the blue states should secede from the country, right? If your problem is that you don't like the GOP and what it represents, then what you should be doing is investing in strategies that can win those parts of the country, because the largest voting base in those red states, right, are non-voters. Right? These are people that you can bring in, but that is not the kind of program that they want to push forward. That is why they were so afraid of Bernie Sanders, right? And I'm talking about the Democratic Party writ large, not Newman right now. That is why the Democratic Party was so afraid of Bernie Sanders, right? Because his whole program was about bringing in new people. And if you were to start bringing in non-voters in this country into the political process, what that actually ends up meaning is that working class people across this country are going to have more say in their government, which is a big fear to somebody like who you were just showing, right? Who thinks that people who don't have enough credentials by their name aren't intelligent and should not be able to make decisions about the society that they live in. Right? Like if your problem is that somebody like Boebert is elected, who sucks? Like we think she sucks too. And your solution to that is not, oh man, we need to find a way to take away her seat, through making her lose an election, but rather create rules to limit democracy. You either have brain worms or you are an elitist who has severe fear of average people in this country.
Yeah, I like the thing. Also goes to Marjorie Taylor Greene, who I'm just saying, like, if I could vote, I would vote to like discipline her, right? But it's a major problem when the main priority the Democrats can get behind is another management project about, you know, scolding people. And yeah, I mean, I think it's to pronounce that this is why we waffle on actually getting money out the door and actual material benefit. And it becomes this, somebody needs a scolding and we need to find somebody's manager and get somebody fired.
Yeah. It's just, you know, this technocratic fetish it needs to go away, because look at there are plenty of people who are monsters and ghouls who can show you all of their degrees, right? Hell, these people's arch nemesis, right? Ted Cruz is a great example of that. Does Ted Cruz's list of degrees, right, from prestigious institutions, Harvard, right? Has that made him any better as somebody in government? No.
Josh Hawley.
Yeah, I mean, like this whole idea that like, oh, the problem with the problem with American politics today is that we don't have enough highly educated people in power is absolutely wrong. The problem with American politics today is that we live in an oligarchy, a system of oligarchy, right? Where a few people essentially run this entire country and they sprinkle themselves out. They go to school at Yale and Harvard, and then they sprinkle themselves out across the country and enact massive amounts of pain on working people. Right. That's the real problem. That's the education question that we should be talking about, is the Ivy Leagues, not people who don't have enough credentials by their name.
Yeah, I'm looking it up now, but yes, here it is. So I'm going to post this. I was a little bit angry, but this was when the WAPO came out against the $2,000 checks. And so I went over the Washington Post editorial board to look at the education of the people on the editorial board, and let's just click through it a little bit. Let's see here. Just give me 1 second, because I think if I can play a little bit of funny music. I'm just going to share this with you first. So the first one, I said Nixon was right about the Ivy League. Of course, Larry Summers was key to it. Then you look at Fred Hyatt, education, Harvard College, Bachelor in History. Jackson Deal, Yale. Ruth Marcus, Yale, Harvard, both of them. So I got both of them there. Let's go down. Next one. And I'm excluding like Harvard and Cambridge, so we're not doing any transatlantic stuff. Lee Hochstadter, Brown, that's also Harvard later. Charles Lane, Harvard. Stephen Stromberg, Harvard, also Oxford. Molly Roberts, Harvard. Let's go down a little bit more. Yale. I think that's Yale. Columbia, Yale, and I think we got another one. Sorry, folks, this will be over soon. We got Brown University, Columbia University, Princeton University, Harvard University. And so that's the highly educated people who know how to do things right.
Yeah, like that's the point, is that like we have not lived in some deficit in the United States of people in high up places who have a bunch of, degrees, right? What we have seen is people in high up places who have, a lot of credentials and a class interest in continuing a war on working people and continuing American imperialism abroad, right? Like it's just amazing to me to sit here in 2021 and to think that the problem in the United States government is a lack of education, rather than to recognize what it really is that there's a lack of representation of everyday people, because the people who represent this government in fact represent a very small pool of people in this country, which is an overeducated elite.
Yeah, I think that like Harvard, Ivy League educated people might be surprised that they aren't preferred vastly over people without even a GED in terms for making these decisions. Like, I mean, I know a lot of people who didn't finish high school that I say I would rather hear from than any of these ghouls that said we didn't need $2,000 during a pandemic.
Yeah. No, I mean, exactly. And all these people who are experts on what working people need to do with their
insane. And like that's who McConnell cited as the the left opposition is Larry Summers, like even Larry Summers and the Washington Post. No, like that's, I mean, talk about like, the Overton window is not as big as we wanted in Congress, at least.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing it's so frustrating about even like the blue state secession argument. Like, it would be one thing if those states represented like some kind of like pro working class movement, right, or were functionally like more progressive, right? Damn. But like in New York, for example, there is a fight right now to make sure that you can just have like basic democracy. Like, so this is supposed to be a blue state, but it's a state that is run by the real estate lobby, right? It is run by the absolute elite and the absolute like worst ghouls in society, right, which are landlords. And especially in this case, large landlords. Like, we're not even talking about somebody who owns maybe like one property. We're talking about huge conglomerates that own an incredible amount of properties. Like, that's essentially how the state of New York's politics have been run for a very long time, and that is without serious Republican opposition, right? Well, it actually got to such an extent where the Democrats, Cuomo, right, was working with certain Democrats to basically create a faux, what is it, the IDC, right? The Independent Democrat.
Literally the thing where like if Republicans didn't exist, Cuomo had to invent them.
They had to invent them because, and that's the point. Is like the Democratic, let's just grant this person's like idea for a second that like New York, Connecticut, California, right, the West Coast in general, Illinois, right? Does Michigan get to go? I assume they're going to leave Virginia because they don't like, Southerners, even if they do occasionally, vote blue from time to time, right? Like, do they think that there's actually going to be this swirl of progressive policy? Some of the biggest characters who fight against progressive policy in United States politics today are of those states, right? Are of, those ostensibly solid blue states, right? We're talking about Obama, Clinton, Hillary Clinton, Joe Biden, Kamala Harris.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. It's an interesting, somebody was talking about Manchin, and are you familiar with wins above replacement for baseball? Like, there's a replacement level player. You could, basically the idea is you have a player and then you have just whatever player you could pick up if you needed to fill a roster spot, right? And it judges like how much better you are than that random person you could replace. Now, you apply that to Cuomo, right? Like, the average Democratic person, like the person that leans to the Democratic Party in New York, is to the left of Cuomo massively, right?
Yeah.
So like we could give all this stuff, and I think like this was in the context of defending Manchin a little bit, saying like, a guy like, and I think Manchin is also, you could replace him with a much more leftist person, but
for sure.
Like, Cuomo has absolutely zero excuse. I mean, like we said, he makes his own excuses to stop him having to do anything.
Yeah, and let's make the big structural point that really matters, right? Because this kind of attitude just pisses me off. The kind of liberal, like coastal elitism, whatever you want to call it, right? It's obnoxious. But how should like socialists be thinking about these problems? It's to understand that we are out of power everywhere. Like, we're not in power in those progressive states, and they're certainly not in power in red states. So the calculus needs to be, we have to run from the outside and fundamentally change all of these systems. And to sit here, like, I guess, like, beyond it just being like snide and disgusting to talk about, undeserving people in this country, to say that like, oh, it's this, like to complain about the fact that billionaires in New York have to subsidize food stamps in Virginia. Oh, sorry, in North Carolina, right? Like, that's a disgusting perspective from its outset. But what also gets me really frustrated is this kind of idea that like these questions have been settled in states like California, which has, I believe, has like the largest housing inequity system in the country, right? Do you have insane housing prices there that have thrown most people either into extreme housing precarity or just out into the street, right? Like, to act like those states have it figured out and the only thing that's preventing us from having some kind of, progressive utopia in this country, is is North Dakota and Texas and, whatever, right? Is just absurd, because the fact is that the institutions that are running those states are just as much an opposition force as the GOP is.
Absolutely.